Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945, 9:02 a.m. The first wave of American Marines hits the Black Beach, and they immediately realize something is terribly wrong. Instead of meeting immediate resistance, they sink to their knees in fine volcanic sand, as if walking in quicksand. Sergeant William Genhorst, a Marine Corps cinematographer, captures images that would become iconic: men pushing tanks stuck in the sand, soldiers crawling under fire as volcanic dust rises in clouds around them. Within minutes, the Marines' boots are heavy with the fine sand that seeps into every seam, every crack, every breath. And then, when the first Japanese shell explodes 50 yards from the beach, they realize the true horror. The volcanic sand is hot enough to burn the soles of their boots. This is not an ordinary battlefield. This is Iwo Jima, where the ground itself has become a deadly enemy. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima, located 650 miles south of Tokyo, was a seemingly inhospitable piece of land, 8 miles long by 4 wide, with Mount Suribachi, a dormant 550-foot volcano, dominating the southern tip. For the American Marines who landed on February 19, 1945, it represented a promise, an outpost for the B-29 bombers attacking Japan. For General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, it was the last line of defense before Japan itself. But for both sides, Iwo Jima revealed itself as something more, the most brutal battlefield of World War II, not just because of the bullets and bombs, but because of the very terrain that burned boots, swallowed men, and made every step a fight against the earth. The problem began with the volcanic sand. Unlike ordinary sand, Iwo Jima's sand was composed of extremely fine basalt particles created by volcanic eruptions over millennia. When the Marines hit the beach, they expected fierce resistance immediately, but they were not prepared for the sand that behaved like quicksand. Lieutenant General Harry Schmidt, commander of the Expeditionary Force, would later describe, "I've never seen anything like that sand." It not only hindered the advance, but created medical conditions none of us could have anticipated. The result was catastrophic. The tanks that were supposed to provide armored cover sank to their axles, unable to move. Logistical support vehicles got stuck. The Marines themselves, loaded with over 60 pounds of gear, sank to their knees with every step, becoming easy targets for Japanese snipers hidden in the hills. But the volcanic sand was just the beginning of the hell. When the Japanese shells began to fall, something surprising happened. The sand began to heat up. Due to its volcanic composition, the sand absorbed and retained heat in an unusual way. With the strong tropical sun beating down and the constant explosions heating the surface, the sand temperature reached levels that could melt the soles of the Marines' boots. Marine John Bradley, who would later become known as one of the flag raisers on Mount Suribachi, would write in his diary, "The sand was so hot I could feel it through the soles of my boots. After hours on the beach, many men had to remove their boots because the sole was melting and sticking to their feet." This phenomenon, documented in several veteran accounts, was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. With damaged boots, the Marines were more vulnerable to shrapnel wounds and had even more difficulty moving through the terrain. The volcanic terrain of Iwo Jima didn't just affect movement, it was alive. The book Iwo Jima, Amphibious Epic * documents that the island was in constant motion due to subterranean volcanic activity. During the night, soldiers often woke up to find their foxholes had collapsed or that the ground had shifted beneath them, the official report states. This instability made building trenches and fortifications almost impossible for the Americans, while the Japanese, who had spent months building an underground complex, had an overwhelming tactical advantage. General Kuribayashi's defensive strategy transformed Iwo Jima into an unprecedented underground fortress. While the Americans expected to find traditional Japanese coastal defenses, Kuribayashi had ordered his men to retreat into the island's interior, building over 11 miles of interconnected tunnels that descended as deep as 7 levels below the surface. These tunnels, carved into the soft volcanic rock, allowed the Japanese to move, resupply, and counterattack without being seen. Major General Grave B. Erskine, commander of the 3rd Marine Division, would describe, "It was like fighting the island itself. You never knew where the next shot would come from because the Japanese could pop up anywhere. This underground network was so sophisticated, it included hospitals, ammunition depots, barracks, and even a complete radio station. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who had spent time in the United States as a military attaché and fully understood American industrial power, knew he couldn't win a war of attrition. His strategy was designed to make every yard cost American blood. As he wrote in his guidelines for junior officers in August 1944, "We will not die in suicidal attacks. Each man will inflict 10 casualties on the enemy before dying. Dig deep positions, fire from the protection of pillboxes, do not expose your positions." The result was a battle of attrition without precedent. While statistics from other Pacific battles showed a 5-to-1 casualty ratio in favor of the Americans, 5 Japanese killed for every American. On Iwo Jima, the ratio was 1.2-to-1. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were taken prisoner during the 36 days of active combat. On the American side, the casualties were shocking: 6,821 killed and over 19,000 wounded. As General Holland Smith, commander of the Marine Corps, would later observe, "I don't know if taking Iwo Jima was strategically necessary, but I do know it was the bloodiest battle our men ever participated in." The brutality of Iwo Jima wasn't just in the numbers, but in the nature of the combat. With no defined lines, no clear front, the American Marines found themselves fighting in a labyrinth of craters, tunnels, and bunkers. Every hill, every rise, every rock was defended to the death. The place known as the Meat Grinder, near Hill 382, became synonymous with carnage. In 1 week of combat, over 800 Marines died to advance less than 200 yards. Captain Dave Severance of Easy Company, 28th Marines, would recall, "It was as if every inch of the island was cursed. You'd advance, take a position, and the next morning the Japanese were back, as if the earth had spit them back out." The Japanese tunnel system created a tactical nightmare for the Americans. The Marines quickly discovered that simply bypassing a bunker was not an option. The Japanese would just reappear behind them, cutting supply and communication lines. The only solution was what they called cave cleaning, a slow, dangerous, and grueling process that involved throwing smoke grenades, blasting with M2 flamethrowers, and sometimes plugging entrances with explosives. Flamethrower operator Robert Sherrod would describe, "Every bunker was a battle in itself. You never knew how many were inside or if they were armed with grenades. It was a deadly lottery." Flamethrower operators in particular faced a terrible fate. The M2, weighing over 60 pounds loaded, had an effective range of only 20-25 yards, forcing the operator to get dangerously close to bunker openings. As a result, flamethrower operators had one of the shortest life expectancies on the battlefield. Captain Ernest Thomas, commander of a flamethrower unit, would later write, "They were the true unsung heroes of Iwo Jima. They knew they were marked for death, but they advanced anyway." The fine volcanic sand created another insidious problem. It got into everything. Weapons jammed constantly. M1919 machine guns and M1 Garand rifles had to be cleaned every few hours or they would stop working. Sergeant Fred Boots Thomas, a Marine who earned his nickname because his boots were constantly filled with sand, would write, "The sand was in our eyes, in our mouths, in our weapons. We had to clean our rifles 3 times a day just to keep them firing." It was like fighting an invisible enemy that was everywhere. For the field medics, the volcanic sand created an additional challenge. Wounds that would normally have healed quickly were becoming infected due to the constant contamination. Captain John W. Hill, chief surgeon of the 5th Division's field hospital, documented, "The fine volcanic sand penetrated open wounds, making basic hygiene difficult and creating conditions for bacterial infections." Despite the use of the newly discovered penicillin, approximately 15–20% of wounds became infected, compared to much higher rates in World War I. The situation was even more desperate for the Japanese defenders buried in the tunnels. Without access to adequate medical supplies, wounded soldiers watched as infections spread untreated. The diary of Japanese military doctor Captain Ryoichi Yoshioka, recovered after the battle, contains harrowing entries. No antibiotics, no adequate pain relievers, not even enough food to maintain the patient's strength. Today, I had to tell a 19-year-old man that his leg was infected, and there was nothing I could do but ease his pain as much as possible. Japanese logistics, though brilliant in terms of underground defense, grossly underestimated the long-term needs. American naval blockades had prevented significant supplies from reaching the island since June 1944. When the battle began in February 1945, the garrison was already operating on reduced reserves. Captain Sunizo Wachi, Kuribayashi's staff officer, recorded in his diary, "Rations were calculated to last 3 months of siege, but we consumed them in 6 weeks due to the intensity of combat. We are now reduced to a quarter of a rice cracker per man per day. Soldiers are collapsing from exhaustion during their watch shifts." For the Americans, logistics were also a constant challenge. The volcanic sand made creating temporary ports difficult, delaying the delivery of critical supplies. The Seabees performed an incredible feat, turning the beaches into operational runways in days. But even so, the Marines often ran low on ammunition, water, and medical supplies. Lieutenant John J. Bradley, a combat medic who would later become one of the flag raisers, would write, "There were times when we had to choose between giving painkillers to the wounded or saving them for those who would come later. It was a terrible but necessary logic." Physical and mental exhaustion became a combat force in itself. The Marines fought in 18-20-hour shifts, with little sleep and less food. The volcanic sand, combined with the tropical heat, caused extreme dehydration. Major General James E. Cheney, Chief Medical Officer of the Expeditionary Force, would later report, "Exhaustion was responsible for more casualties than many enemy weapons. Men would simply fall asleep while walking, exposed to enemy fire." The night brought little relief. While the Marines expected the traditional nightly banzai counterattacks, Kuribayashi had forbidden these suicidal charges, considering them a waste of soldiers. Instead, the Japanese used the nights to move silently through the tunnels, infiltrating American lines to throw grenades or simply to observe. Captain Dave Severance would recall, "It was the most unbearable tension. You never knew if you were safe, even when you weren't shooting. It was like fighting ghosts." The battle reached its climax on March 26, 1945, when General Kuribayashi led his own final attack. It was not a traditional banzai charge, but a night infiltration operation with his last 300 men. Even in death, he maintained his tactical conviction. His body was never identified, the final anonymity for the man who rejected traditional glory. The attack was a tactical failure, but symbolically significant. It showed that to the very end, Kuribayashi refused to follow traditional Japanese doctrine. 75 years later, Iwo Jima remains a monument to the horror of modern war. The statistics tell part of the story: 36 days of combat, 6,821 Americans killed, 19,000 wounded, 21,000 Japanese killed. But the numbers don't capture the essence of the hell the Marines faced. A battlefield where the ground itself burned boots, where every step was a fight against the earth, where the enemy could emerge from anywhere. The deepest lesson of Iwo Jima is that in any conflict, environmental challenges can be as decisive as military strategies. The battle was won not just by numerical or technological superiority, but by the ability to adapt to a hostile environment and overcome physical challenges that could have been just as devastating as the enemy in combat. General Holland Smith summed it up best. Iwo Jima was a place where common men were called upon to do the impossible and where the very ground conspired against them. Today, when we study Iwo Jima, we must remember not only the heroes who raised the flag on Suribachi, but the thousands of men on both sides who fought on a battlefield where the ground burned boots, where the sand swallowed men, where every conquered yard cost dearly in blood. These are the true heroes of Iwo Jima's history, not those who sought glory, but those who persisted despite the hell beneath their feet. The most enduring lesson of Iwo Jima is that even in the most technologically advanced warfare, basic human resilience remains the most critical factor of all. While weapons and tactics change, the ability of ordinary men to endure extreme conditions, the ground that burns, the sand that swallows. The exhaustion that saps the will remains the true measure of courage. And on Iwo Jima, that courage was tested like nowhere else in World War II.